was, you know, going back to this scenario, could I have it where I'm an ISV or an application, again, this works for both internal and internal apps and ISVs. Maybe I have the service and I invested so much in a deployment process, storage, and architecture that's load balanced in other places. Do I really have to put that into GCC High? Well, I'm not going to be the judge and jury on this. So I'm just going to talk to you about the capabilities. No, you don't have to. Right? You don't have to at all, except for a couple pieces. One, if you're going to have people in this space here in the GCC High instance and be able to consent to use their application, yes, you're going to have a client ID over here, even though your application doesn't reside here, because you still need to have a client registration. You still need to have a tenant for them to authorize. Now, once you have that, the Azure Active Directory, when you're logging in, it doesn't check like, hey, is that server running in Azure government? Because maybe it was an AWS government. Maybe it was on-prem, super secure, great stuff that you wanted to have. And and the data that you have isn't going to violate any CUI. So you would do it here. And in here in your app service, there's a couple of ways that you can go do it. One is you could branch off a separate segment of servers and go, hey, this way we can just have the same deployment of servers, but in the config, in the web.config or the JSON files for it, we can tell it that this bank of servers, which has a different, maybe gov.myapplication.com, and this one's just myapplication.com. But when people log into this one, we connect it to our tenant. So this way, those app registrations just work. We just run in a different environment, but all the authentication works. Azure AD is over here. It's fine. You want to think about some background networking here and stuff, but that's another thing. So that could work. What if I just wanted to have one that could do it? You could do it, but it's a little harder to do with some of the built-in tools that some of the Microsoft Identity has. Maybe you're using something else, Shibboleth or whatever that can handle, or Identity Server that can handle that for you. It's up to your architecture that understands when people come in, but you do need to decipher it somehow, right? So maybe because they go to agileIT.myapplication.com, I go, oh, when they go to that URL, I can see it, check my database, and know that's a government endpoint. I shoot them over there. So you may have to make adjustments in your applications, but you could have one service here that's running in this background. It's just on Azure. But when we know the person that has it, we need to log them in or consent that we're firing off to the kind of global the government world. But then again, if you're providing a service that is more generic, not CUI based, again, you'd have to really consider it. But you're providing services into the government space, you could still do that. But you would still need this tenant, right? And we've worked with several customers that did it that way. So you can go do that. If you are going to store some sensitive data or possibly get in there, then you probably want to be in this particular space. You can still handle multiple deployments. I want the same code base going to both, and so you can still have good CI/CD process from Azure DevOps or GitHub that pushes it into both. So you keep your code bases synced. It's just they know when the automated pipeline pushes to one over here, we use the gov one. When we do over here, we use the commercial one, and we can still have consistency. But we have two different tenants, two different storage types, two different client IDs. So you have to get in mind. In a later webinar, we'll talk about more security around these things. How would you manage this? How you detect this? How you control this? As well as other recommendations in terms of how would you operate in this type of environment. But for now, we thought that this would be a session to kind of get people going to understand that you can't just wire up just the endpoint. You are going to need a tenant. You are going to need this, but you can determine what you want to store and where you want to store it and for whom you want to store it, which is a whole other discussions. Love to talk to you about it. So with that, let me just here we go. So we talked about this, some concerns. And again, just kind of summing it up here is that, the planning for this, understanding the consent flow, especially when you're doing it with GCC High and your commercial, to understand the differences of it. Where does it go? How do I store it? The multi-tenant one of it is, I think, really key for ISVs to go, hey, wait a minute, I can actually do that and make that easier to handle it. One question that can kind of come in is, well, I have things like, cross-tenant collaboration, which is supposed to make it easier between multiple tenants to share things. This has nothing to do with that. They're like completely different worlds than what you would go do. to go do with that. Can you make them work? Yes, but that's not really the point of this conversation. Most of it is this consent flow with OAuth and against the different tenants. Being able to understand your secrets, how it's managed, when it's used, where does it go to, controlling those endpoints. That's something that needs a lot of consideration, because the last thing you want to do is leak any of that and have people be able to access it. It's not as easy as just, well, hey, if somebody just gets it, they can go. There's more information that you would need. You can control where it's used. So in the app registration, what endpoints would be allowed to request it, come back. So there's good controls to help go through that. Proper planning, testing, validation is key to make that work. And for those that one of the things is when you're doing the scopes is your application or service could provide lots of benefits. You have plan 1, plan 2, plan 3, capabilities 1, capabilities 2. So you don't want to ask for all scopes, because you're doing too much. They didn't need to buy that, or it's not ready for that. And you can consent for something and go, I want these 3 scopes. And now when that service is ready, or somebody buys a plan, or if it's used for that in that view, you can do a reconsent and get scopes added on. So you can do that as you move along. So, constrict for what you need, keep track of it, and go do that. And lastly, when you're doing things from single app to multiple apps, there are some changes in terms of the URL that you pass for the login, where instead of doing the domain, login/domain, it's going to be /common, because you're going to say, hey, this could be anybody. But now you have to be able to keep track on your end the tenants that you've approved of, because you're going to need that ID and map to the service when you make the call for the tokens and more information. So there's more that goes into it. It's actually some really good content and starter kits for Microsoft. I don't have that here and there, but if you're in this space and you're looking to get into it, we'd love to help you out here at Agile IT and both help in getting the license. There's things where, hey, if I go into this, do I have to buy all the Microsoft 365 expensive licensing? The answer is no, you don't. But there's a few licenses you should have to make sure that the right security and access is being had when you are accessing it, when your partners or vendors or support people are accessing it. So because you still need to get audited and control that kind of stuff. That was not the purpose of this discussion, but more things we can help out. So with that, hopefully this gave you at least some insight and some things to consider. There's so much to go into this. I was going to show like all the URL paths, but I'm like, there'd be no time, to go through it. So there's a lot to squeeze in to kind of the first. So we're going to have subsequent sessions that goes a little bit deeper on this. If we're already planning it, but if you have other requests in the community, please send it through, and we'd love to talk with you and continue to share. So with that, I think we'd be able to open it up for questions.
Great. Thanks a lot, Conrad. We are going to keep recording. For those of you watching on YouTube, there will be a link to register for our next webinar down below in the comments. So feel free to join if you want to come and be part of the Q&A. But right now, I'm going to go ahead and open up the microphones.